The man stepped into the luxury mall as the evening wore on. His construction boots, caked in red dust, dragged long streaks across the polished white marble floor. A saleswoman looked at him as though he had wandered into a place he did not belong. A manager quietly motioned for security to stand closer. But before the night was over, the entire shopping floor fell into absolute silence when that same man set a black card on the counter and asked to purchase every piece in the upper collection. No one understood who he really was. The mall sat at the heart of downtown Chicago, a 4-story glass tower wrapped in brushed steel, the kind of place where the lighting alone cost more than a working man earned in a year. Inside, the air was cooled to a precise temperature, and soft jazz drifted from speakers no customer ever bothered to find. Display windows held mannequins in suits that watched the marble floor with a kind of polite disdain. People came here to be seen. They came to confirm to themselves and to others that they belonged. In the parking garage, 2 levels below, an older pickup truck rolled into a corner spot. The man who climbed out wore canvas and steel toes and the dust of a long day's work. He did not glance at the rows of foreign sedans on either side. He locked the truck, pocketed the keys, and walked toward the elevators, with the unhurried gait of a man who had nowhere left to prove himself. Nathan Cole had no intention of impressing anyone. He had come straight from a job site on the south side, where the foundation of a 40-story tower was finally settling into place after 19 months of hard, dirty work. His jacket was a faded canvas thing, washed soft over the years, and the steel-toed boots on his feet still carried the red clay of the morning's pour. His hands, broad and calloused, wore a thin film of dried cement along the knuckles. He had not bothered to change. 22 years in construction had taught him that the work always came home with you, whether you wanted it or not. He was 43, lean in the way men who lift things for a living are lean, with quiet eyes and a measured way of moving that made strangers vaguely uncomfortable. The industrial materials company he had built from a single truck and a borrowed loan now supplied half the high-rises going up across the Midwest. Very few people knew that. Nathan preferred it that way. Money and his experience made people loud, and he had spent his life trying to be the opposite. The penthouse he had purchased 6 months earlier was finally ready. Empty walls, empty floors, a wide pane of glass facing the lake. He needed furniture. He needed light fixtures, a dining set, a sofa that did not feel like an office. He had decided that morning while signing the final inspection papers that he would walk into a place that sold beautiful things and let someone help him pick them out. The first sign that the evening would not go his way came at the front desk. The receptionist, a woman with a pinned smile, looked him up and down once, and then turned back to her screen as if he had stopped existing. He waited a polite 10 seconds before clearing his throat, and even then she took her time looking up. When she finally asked whether she could help him, the question already contained its answer. Nathan said he was looking to furnish a residence. She made a small humming sound and gestured vaguely toward an escalator. "Our clearance section is on level 2. Then she was done with him. He took the escalator up. The showrooms opened into one another, like a series of bright, expensive rooms, each one staffed by men and women in tailored black. Nathan walked slowly. He let his eyes drift over the leather, the brushed brass, the woods he could name by grain alone. He stopped beside a long walnut dining table and ran his fingers across its edge. Hand finished. $12,000 easily. He liked it. A young man in a slim suit appeared at his elbow, watched him for a long moment, and then walked away without a word. 2 more salespeople drifted past in the next 10 minutes. None of them spoke to him. One of them, a woman with sharp shoulders and a sharper laugh, leaned toward a colleague near the cashier counter and murmured something Nathan could not quite catch. The colleague glanced at his boots and smiled behind her hand. Nathan kept his face still. He had seen this look before in banks and at car dealerships, in every place where the price of a man's shoes was treated as the price of his soul. It used to bother him when he was younger. Now, it only made him quiet. Across the floor, near a display of brass floor lamps, a young woman named Claire Monroe was watching the whole thing. Claire was 26 and had been on the sales floor for exactly 4 months. She had taken the job after a long stretch of waitressing, drawn in by the promise of commission and by the way the listing had used the word career. She had not yet hit a single monthly target. Her colleagues, most of whom had been there for years, treated her the way veterans treat a recruit they suspect will not last the season. She was, in the floor manager's words, too gentle. She had spent the last hour rearranging a display nobody had asked her to rearrange, because the alternative was sitting at the back counter, pretending not to hear the others laugh. Her rent was due the following week, and the commission she had earned in 4 months would not cover half of it. She was learning slowly how to hold her face still, while the others made their small jokes around her. When the man in the dusty boots stepped onto the floor, she had noticed him at once, and she had noticed too the careful choreography by which everyone else avoided him. She watched him stop at the walnut table. She watched him touch the wood, the way a carpenter touches wood, not the way a buyer touches it. Then she set down the lamp she was holding and walked across the floor toward him. Her supervisor, a tall man named Trevor Hayes, caught her arm before she reached him. Trevor was in his early 50s, silver at the temples, with the practiced warmth of a man who had spent most of his working life selling expensive things to wealthy people. He smelled faintly of cologne and of something colder underneath. "Don't waste your hours on people who can't afford anything," Trevor said quietly close to her ear. "He's not a buyer. Look at him. Go straighten the rugs in the back." Claire offered the small, polite smile she had learned to use on men who told her what to do. "I'll just say hello." Trevor's jaw tightened, but he let her go. She crossed the last of the distance and stopped a respectful step away from Nathan. He had moved from the dining table to a low gray sofa, and he was studying it with the focused attention of someone reading a letter. Claire spoke first, introducing herself by name and asking whether there was anything she could show him tonight, or whether he would rather walk through on his own. Nathan looked up at her. His eyes were the kind of eyes that took a person in all at once. He did not seem surprised that someone had finally spoken to him. He did not seem grateful either. He simply looked at her, the way he had looked at the wood. He said he was furnishing a place and that he didn't quite know where to start. Claire glanced at the sofa, then back at him. Something in his face and the quietness of him made her ask the next question without thinking. "Are you looking for a beautiful place to live in?" she said. "Or are you looking for the feeling of a home?" A small, surprised smile moved through Nathan's face and was gone almost before she saw it. "That's the right question," he said. From the other end of the floor, Trevor was watching them with narrowed eyes. 2 of the saleswomen near the register had turned to watch as well, their amused little glances flickering between Claire and the man in the dusty boots, like coins being passed between gamblers. One of them muttered just loud enough to carry that the new girl was about to waste her entire shift on a window shopper. Claire heard it. So did Nathan. Neither of them looked over. "Walk with me," Claire said. "Tell me about the place." Nathan began to talk as they moved between the displays. He did not talk about money. He did not mention square footage or zip codes or any of the language other customers used to establish themselves. He talked about light. He told her he wanted a room where the morning came in slowly, the kind of light a man could drink coffee in without thinking too hard about the day ahead. He told her he had spent more than 2 decades on construction sites, and that for most of those years. He had eaten his lunch on a folded jacket in the dust. He said he wanted finally a chair he could sit in at the end of a day. He said he wanted the apartment to feel warm enough that when he stepped through the door, he could believe his life had arrived somewhere. Claire listened. She did not interrupt. As he spoke, she began to notice things about him. She had missed at first. The way he named specific woods. The way he glanced almost involuntarily at the joinery of a cabinet they passed, as though reading the work of another man's hand. He was not a tourist on this floor. He was something else, something she could not yet place. Behind them, Trevor's voice rose briefly as he scolded another junior employee for some small infraction. Claire felt the pressure of his attention on her back like a hand. She knew what she was doing might cost her. She knew the others were already laughing, already making small bets about how long this would take. She kept walking with Nathan anyway. Whatever this man was, he was not what they had decided he was, and she was not going to decide him by his boots. The tour took them slowly across the second floor and then up to the third, where the rugs grew thicker underfoot and the prices began to lose their decimals. Claire walked half a step ahead of Nathan, naming designers and pointing out the differences in joinery finishes and frames. She watched his face for signs of overwhelm or boredom and found neither. He listened the way some men listen to weather reports with full attention and no visible reaction. Behind them, the mockery on the floor had grown bolder. Two of the salespeople, a woman named Brooke and a younger man named Derek, had positioned themselves near a glass display where they could pretend to polish the surface and watch Claire at the same time. Brooke called Nathan just under her breath, but not quite under it, the construction uncle. Derek set a $5 bill on the counter and bet Brooke that Claire would be back at the register inside of 20 minutes, empty-handed and embarrassed. Trevor Hayes was watching from a different angle. He had been a senior consultant on this floor for almost 23 years, and he had built his reputation on knowing within 30 seconds who came to spend money and who came to look. He had decided about Nathan inside of 5. Now he watched Claire lead the man toward the upper galleries, and the decision was beginning to bother him. Not because he doubted his read, because he could not understand why the man had not yet left. He cut across the floor and intercepted them near the elevators. Trevor greeted Nathan with the wide, careful smile of a man who had practiced graciousness the way other men practice the piano. He introduced himself, complimented Nathan's interest in the upper collection, and then mentioned very smoothly that for purchases above a certain threshold, the store had a small policy, a simple courtesy step, verification of payment capacity before further consultation. He was sorry to mention it. He was sure Nathan understood. Nathan looked at him for a long moment, and then said, without any heat in his voice, that he understood completely. He did not, however, produce any verification. He simply waited. Trevor's smile thinned. He suggested with the gentleness of a man pushing a stranger out of a doorway that perhaps the second floor had selections that might suit Nathan's current needs more comfortably. There was no insult in any single word. The whole sentence was the insult. Claire watched Nathan's face. She expected to see anger or the small, quiet collapse she had seen on 100 customers when Trevor maneuvered them out. She saw neither. Nathan only nodded as if Trevor had told him about the weather. Then he turned to Claire and asked whether she would mind walking him through the upper gallery anyway. He said it without raising his voice, without challenging Trevor, without theater of any kind. Trevor was suddenly the man holding nothing. He stepped aside. Up on the 3rd floor, Nathan stopped beside a long sideboard in dark walnut and asked Claire almost casually whether the wood had been kiln-dried or air-dried. Claire opened her mouth and admitted she did not know. Nathan ran his thumb along the underside of the lip and said half to himself, "Air-dried. 6-7 years." He named the cabinet maker the piece reminded him of. He talked briefly about a building he had finished in St. Louis, where they had used the same joinery for the lobby paneling. Claire listened to him with growing careful surprise. He spoke about the mall's own architecture in passing the cantilevered staircase, the way the curtain wall had been anchored to the original frame. He spoke without showing off. He spoke the way a man speaks about a kitchen he has cooked in for many years. By the time they reached the gallery's far end, she had stopped trying to place him and had simply accepted that she had been wrong completely, and from the beginning, about what she was walking next to. She brought him last to the showcase floor she was technically not supposed to enter alone. It was a single vast room at the top of the building, set up as a model penthouse, the kind of space they reserved for clients who arrived by appointment. The lighting was warm. The far wall was a single sheet of glass, 3 stories tall, and beyond it, downtown Chicago lay across the early evening in a long fall of orange and slate. Nathan stopped 1 step inside the doorway and looked at it. He stood there for a long time. Claire did not interrupt him. She watched the light move across his face and understood slowly that whatever was happening inside this man was not happening for her benefit. He was simply looking. He walked eventually to the glass and rested his fingertips against it. The hand that touched the window still carried the faint, dry pail of cement at the knuckle. "I have spent 22 years," Nathan said, "building beautiful places for other people to live in." His voice was even. He was not asking her to feel anything. "I have never had one of my own." Claire stayed where she was. She felt with a quiet certainty that what was happening in front of her was no longer a sale. It was a man, after a very long time, allowing himself to want something for himself, and saying so out loud perhaps for the first time. She said nothing. She let him have the window. Trevor had followed them up. He stood in the hallway just outside the showcase, and he had heard enough to understand what he had missed. The clothing meant nothing. The boots meant nothing. The man in front of the glass was not a window shopper. He was a buyer, and the room he was standing in carried a price tag with 7 figures, and the commission alone was more than Trevor had earned in any single month of the previous year. Something cold and quick moved across Trevor's face, and then it was gone, replaced by a new, brighter version of his earlier smile. He stepped into the room as if he had been there all along. He cleared his throat warmly and announced with the practiced cheer of a man saving a colleague from a task above her station that he would be honored to take over the consultation from here. A purchase of this scale, he said, called for senior support. Trevor told Claire with a touch of paternal kindness to take a short break. She had earned it. Claire felt the floor shift slightly under her. She had seen Trevor do this before, twice to other juniors. She knew exactly what was about to happen. The hours she had spent walking with Nathan, the questions she had asked, the careful trust she had built with the only customer who had ever spoken to her as an equal. All of it was about to be lifted out of her hands and signed with a flourish by a man who had wanted to push Nathan onto the 2nd floor an hour earlier. She did not move. She did not say anything. She only looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back at her. He did not speak. He turned his head a small fraction toward Trevor, then back toward Claire, and something passed between them, something she could not have named in words. Then he simply walked further into the room and continued to look at the city, leaving Trevor's offer hanging in the air, neither accepted nor refused. Trevor took silence for permission. By the time they came back down to the main floor, he had taken full possession of the conversation. He walked beside Nathan, opened doors for him, named senior names. The other salespeople had clearly been informed. Brooke, who had called him the construction uncle an hour earlier, now appeared with a small tray of bottled water and a smile so wide it looked painful. Derek, who had bet $5 against Claire, stepped forward to offer his card and any assistance the gentleman might need. Nathan accepted the water. He thanked them by name. He looked to anyone watching like a man being attended to. He was in fact watching them in return. Claire was sent to the back office. The reason given was administrative, the preparation of paperwork, the printing of the spec sheets. She knew it was a removal. She walked past the cluster of her colleagues with her face set, and she heard behind her one of them murmur something to another about how the senior team had stepped in just in time. She closed the office door, sat down in the chair, and looked at her hands. She did not cry. She had learned in her 4 months on the floor that crying in this building was a form of resignation. She thought briefly about the rent due the following week. She thought about the listing that had used the word career. Then she sat up straighter, smoothed her sleeves, and waited for whatever they would call her back to do. The closing was scheduled for the main consultation suite on the ground level, a glass-walled room visible from half the floor. Trevor had arranged it that way deliberately. He wanted the staff to see it. He had laid out the contract on a long table, had ordered champagne. Glasses set on a side console had even called the assistant general manager down to witness the signature. By the time Nathan arrived, escorted by Trevor like a head of state, 15 or so employees had drifted to the edges of the suite to watch. Claire was among them, brought back from the office for the formality. Trevor opened the meeting with a short speech of welcome. He praised Nathan's taste. He praised the store's heritage. He spoke for nearly 3 minutes, and in those 3 minutes, he did not say Claire's name once. Claire stood near the back wall and watched the contract on the table, with the steady, quiet feeling of a person watching a door close. The number on the second page of the agreement was by itself more money than she had ever seen in one place. None of it, in any version of what was about to happen, would carry her name. Trevor slid the contract toward Nathan and offered him a pen. He smiled. "Whenever you're ready, sir." Nathan looked at the pen. He looked at the contract. He looked at Trevor. Then he set the pen down gently on the polished surface of the table and turned his head until his eyes found Claire at the back of the room. He held her gaze for a small, even moment. Then he stood up. "Before anyone signs anything," Nathan said, "I would like the finance team to bring up the full transaction file, the complete one, for the entire upper collection." His voice was as quiet as it had been all evening, but the room heard it. Trevor's smile faltered. "I am not buying the model unit," Nathan went on. "I am buying the floor, every piece in the upper showcase. I will be furnishing a property portfolio with it, beginning with my own residence. We are talking by my count, something north of $18 million in product." A small, soundless shift moved through the watching staff, the kind of movement a herd makes when a sound it cannot identify reaches the field. Nathan turned slowly and looked at the room, at the salespeople gathered along the glass, at the manager beside the console, at Trevor, still holding out the pen as if he had forgotten it was in his hand. He spoke without raising his voice. "There is one person in this building," he said, "who treated me like a human being from the moment I walked through the door. Everyone else in this room began to be polite to me only when they thought I might be rich. I have been watching all of you for the last 2 hours. I know exactly who said what." His eyes returned to Claire at the back wall. "Her name is Claire Monroe. She will be the sole representative on this transaction. Anyone who has a problem with that arrangement can leave the room now." The mall, for the first time all evening, made no sound at all. The silence held for what felt like a long count. Trevor stood with the pen still in his hand, his smile frozen, the muscles of his face caught between two expressions that no longer fit together. The assistant general manager beside the console set down the folder he had been holding and stepped forward without quite knowing what he meant to do. None of the salespeople along the glass moved. Brooke had gone pale. Derek was looking at the floor. Nathan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He sat back down at the long table, folded his hands in front of him, and waited. The quiet of the room was no longer the quiet of shock. It was the quiet of a verdict, and every person in the suite could feel which side of it they were standing on. The assistant general manager, a man named Walter Briggs, who had overseen the upper floors for nearly a decade, was the first to recover. He thanked Nathan for his patience and asked, with the careful courtesy of a man trying to save several careers at once, whether he might step out for 2 minutes to bring the proper documentation. Nathan nodded once. Walter walked quickly toward the back office. When he returned, he was carrying a fresh folder, and Claire Monroe was walking a step behind him. Trevor was by then no longer in the room. He had been escorted to a private office by the head of personnel called in by Walter while the new documentation was being pulled. The conversation in that office did not last long. Within 40 minutes, the personnel director was on the phone with corporate, and within the hour, An internal review had been opened into customer treatment practices on the upper floors. Brooke and Derek were both asked to remain after closing for separate interviews. By the time the mall locked its doors that night, 3 years of small casual contempt had become a paper file with everyone's name in it. On the consultation floor, Walter laid the corrected paperwork in front of Nathan and stepped back. Claire took the seat Trevor had been sitting in. Her hands shook a little when she set them on the table, but her voice did not. She walked Nathan through every line of the agreement, the same way she had walked him through the showroom an hour earlier, with care and with clarity. Nathan listened. He asked 2 questions about delivery scheduling. He signed. Walter, watching from the side of the room, understood that what he was seeing was not only a transaction, it was a correction. Within the week, Claire would be moved out of her junior position and into a role created specifically for the partnership Nathan was opening with the store, a portfolio account managed at the senior tier. The promotion would skip 3 internal grades. It would also be unanimous. Walter, who had spent the better part of 10 years watching deserving juniors get ground down by men like Trevor, would sign the paperwork himself. When the contract was complete, Nathan stood. He did not make a speech. He did, however, look once around the room before he left, taking in the faces along the glass, with the same even attention he had used at the dining table earlier in the evening. He spoke to the room as a whole. "I was not testing anyone tonight," he said. "I do not play games like that. I came here to buy furniture. I dress the way I dress because I came from work and because I have never seen the point of putting on a costume to be treated like a person." He let the sentence settle in the room. Then he added more quietly, "If somebody only treats me well when they think I am rich, that respect was never real to begin with." He turned to Claire. He thanked her simply by name. Then he walked out across the marble floor he had walked in on 2 hours earlier, past the displays, past the receptionist, who had once pointed him toward the clearance section, and who now did not know where to look. The dust on his boots had worked its way into the creases of the leather and would not come out again. He did not bother to apologize for the streaks he had left behind. In the days that followed, the deliveries began. Trucks arrived at the service entrance of the high-rise on the north end of the city, in careful succession scheduled a few hours apart so that nothing would crowd the freight elevator. Movers in clean uniforms carried the long walnut table up in pieces and assembled it in silence. The gray sofa came in a wooden crate and was set down in front of the wide window. Brass lamps, ceramic bowls, a heavy reading chair in oxblood leather, each piece arrived with its tag and its provenance, and was placed exactly where Claire had marked the floor plan she had drawn up after the contract was signed. She did not come herself for any of those days. She was running the rest of the partnership now, and there were 30 more units across Nathan's portfolio that needed to be furnished after this one. 3 weeks later, the deliveries were complete. The penthouse Nathan had purchased 6 months earlier was no longer empty. The walnut dining table sat under a low brass light. The gray sofa faced the long pane of glass. The morning came in slowly through the window, exactly the way he had told Claire he wanted it. He stood at the glass at 6 in the morning with a cup of black coffee in his hand. The city was still half asleep. The lake beyond the towers was the color of pewter. He was wearing the same boots he had worn into the mall 3 weeks earlier, the red dust of a different job site already settled along the seams. He had not bought new ones. He had not seen any reason to. Claire arrived at 7 as scheduled. She had a small leather folder under one arm and a single envelope in her hand. The envelope contained the final set of keys, the ones that opened the service doors and the building's private elevator. She had been given the honor of delivering them in person. The honor was by then an ordinary part of her job. He let her in. She walked through the apartment with the careful, attentive eyes of someone who had spent weeks picking each piece in the room. She did not say much. She was not the kind of person who needed to fill a quiet space with talk, and Nathan was not the kind of man who required her to. She set the envelope on the dining table and turned to face him. He thanked her, He told her the place felt right. He said it the way he said most things without decoration, and she understood again that this was the highest form of approval he was capable of giving. The morning light reached across the floor and caught the grain of the dining table. Claire stood for a moment and watched it, and thought with no particular pride that the room had become exactly what he had described to her on the night they first met. She asked him before she left whether he ever regretted not changing before walking into the mall that first night, whether it would not have been simpler to wear something different. He looked at her for a long, steady moment, and then he gave her the only answer he had. "People spend their lives building tall buildings," he said. "The harder thing is building a character large enough not to look down on anyone else." He walked her to the door. She rode the private elevator down through the slow floors of the building and out into the morning. Behind her in the apartment above, Nathan returned to the glass and drank the rest of his coffee while the city came awake. The story did not end with a punishment, although there was one. Trevor Hayes did not return to the floor he had ruled for 23 years. The two salespeople who had bet $5 on Claire's failure were quietly moved to other branches. The internal review reshaped the training of every new hire on the upper floors for the next 2 years. None of that was the point. The point was simpler and older than any of them. A person's worth is not measured by the price of his shoes. The respect that arrives only after the bank statement does is not respect at all. The people who matter in the end are the ones who treat strangers like human beings before they know what those strangers can offer them. That is the lesson Nathan Cole carried into the mall in his dusty boots. It is the lesson Claire Monroe carried out with the keys in her hand the morning the deliveries were finished.